So the desire to start a company. I was in the military for 24 years. I actually think it's an obligation, as an American.
You thought FantomWorks ended because the ratings dipped or the audience moved on, but that is only part of the truth. Behind the polished restorations and dramatic edits was a storm that few outside the shop ever saw. Dan Short, the man who built FantomWorks from nothing, was juggling lawsuits, production battles, and mounting pressure from a network that wanted more drama than reality. What started as a dream to showcase craftsmanship slowly turned into a fight to protect his reputation, his team, and his sanity. The show's finale wasn't just the end of a TV run. It was the result of years of tension, mistakes, and a breaking point that no camera ever caught. This is what really went down between Dan Short and FantomWorks. Before FantomWorks became one of the most watched car restoration shows on television, it was just one man's dream inside an old, worn-down factory in Norfolk, Virginia. Dan Short wasn't a Hollywood type or a reality TV hopeful. He was a former Army officer who had spent years flying missions, fixing machines, and leading teams. When he left the military, he traded helicopters for classic cars, driven by a simple idea: restore them the right way, no shortcuts, no gimmicks. That dedication to detail became the DNA of FantomWorks. At first, it was just Dan, a few skilled mechanics, and a handful of rusted vehicles. But word spread fast. Customers began to drive hundreds of miles just to have their cars brought back to life by the ex-soldier who treated every project like a mission. By 2012, television producers had taken notice. They loved Dan's intensity, the raw, no-nonsense energy of his team, and the genuine transformations that came out of his shop. It wasn't long before the Velocity Channel came knocking, pitching a reality show that would follow the crew through every challenge, argument, and deadline. When FantomWorks premiered in 2013, viewers were hooked. The show felt different, grittier, more authentic, less scripted than other automotive series. There were no exaggerated sound effects or fake reveals, just real people, real cars, and the kind of perfectionism that could drive anyone mad. Fans loved Dan's blunt honesty. He didn't sugarcoat mistakes, and he didn't play the TV mechanic role. He yelled, pushed, and demanded excellence, all while revealing his deep respect for craftsmanship and history. But as the episodes piled up, so did the pressure. The more popular the show became, the more deadlines there were to meet, and the more producers began to shape stories for the sake of television pacing. Dan's vision, one built on integrity and authenticity, was slowly colliding with the demands of show business. He had built FantomWorks to restore cars, not to perform for cameras. And that tension, though hidden behind the roar of engines, was beginning to take its toll. Because behind every gleaming restoration on screen, there was a deadline, a disagreement, and a growing feeling that the dream was changing into something else entirely. But the cracks didn't fully show, at least not yet. Those came later, when a single lawsuit pulled FantomWorks out of the workshop and straight into a courtroom. Just as FantomWorks was finding its rhythm on television, an unexpected story began to unfold behind the scenes, one that had nothing to do with engines, paint jobs, or deadlines. In 2012, long before most viewers even knew the show existed, a customer filed a lawsuit against Dan Short and his shop, accusing them of misrepresentation and breach of contract. On paper, it looked like a simple disagreement between a client and a contractor. But when news of it spread, it became something much bigger, a stain on a reputation that Dan had worked years to build. The client claimed that FantomWorks had promised a restoration that never materialized as agreed, while Dan argued that the car owner had misunderstood the costs, the timeline, and the level of work involved. Anyone who has ever restored a vintage car knows that surprises are part of the process. Rust, hidden damage, or rare parts can easily double both cost and time. But lawsuits do not always care about context. They care about paperwork, signatures, and interpretation. For a man who had built his name on honor and precision, being accused of dishonesty was a gut punch. Dan had faced pressure in the Army, but this was different. This time, the battle was about his integrity. Though the case dragged on for years, by 2014, the legal dust had mostly settled, with reports suggesting that Dan had been cleared, or that the matter had been resolved without major penalty. But the damage had already been done in another way, the court of public opinion. Online forums, car groups, and social media lit up with debate. Some defended Dan fiercely, saying he was a perfectionist who refused to cut corners, and that unhappy clients were simply people who underestimated the real cost of restoration. Others saw the lawsuit as proof that something inside FantomWorks was not as polished as it appeared on television. The truth was likely somewhere in between, but public opinion rarely leaves room for nuance. Even though the show continued, the tension around the shop began to grow. Dan's team was feeling the strain, not just from the workload, but from the constant presence of cameras, the public scrutiny, and now the legal spotlight. Every project had to be flawless. Every delivery had to meet not only a customer's standards, but also the expectations of a national audience. And as FantomWorks gained fame, those expectations only became heavier. Dan tried to keep his focus on the work, to shut out the noise and keep restoring cars as he always had. But the pressure wasn't just external anymore. It was seeping into the shop's culture, changing the way the team functioned and the way Dan approached his dream. The lawsuit was only the first visible crack, but it hinted at something deeper, a clash between passion and production, art and business, truth and television. And as the cameras kept rolling, that conflict was about to explode in ways no one could have predicted. Because the real breaking point wasn't the lawsuit, it was what happened when FantomWorks and the network stopped seeing eye to eye. As FantomWorks gained momentum, its raw authenticity became both its greatest strength and its biggest problem. Viewers were drawn to Dan Short's no-nonsense approach, the way he called out mistakes, pushed his team, and refused to fake drama for the cameras. But behind the scenes, that same honesty was starting to clash with the demands of television production. The network wanted a story in every episode, conflict, emotion, and high-stakes deadlines. Dan just wanted to fix cars the right way. Every episode required a certain formula, a dramatic challenge, a conflict in the shop, and a satisfying payoff at the end. But real restoration work does not follow scripts or shoot schedules. Some projects take months, even years. When filming crews expected quick turnarounds, it put tremendous pressure on Dan's staff, who were already working long hours just to keep up. Cars had to be finished faster, budgets had to be tighter, and the atmosphere grew more intense. The television version of FantomWorks demanded constant momentum. The real shop, however, ran on patience and precision. Dan began to see a disconnect between what viewers believed and what was actually happening. On screen, everything looked seamless. Cars rolled in broken and rolled out perfect, all within 40 minutes. Off camera, there were mistakes, breakdowns, and sleepless nights. Some fans accused the show of being too staged. Others thought Dan's temperament was too harsh. But what few realized was that the constant presence of cameras had changed the dynamic of the shop entirely. Every conversation could end up on national TV, every mistake magnified for entertainment. There were whispers that producers sometimes pushed for more conflict between Dan and his crew, wanting him to lose his temper or create friction that would make for better TV. Dan reportedly pushed back hard against that approach, refusing to fake drama for views. He had built his business on truth and craftsmanship, not performance. But in the world of reality television, truth alone does not always sell. As seasons passed, the relationship between FantomWorks and the network grew strained. Creative disagreements became regular occurrences. Dan wanted to show the educational, technical side of restoration, the careful process that makes each car unique. The network wanted emotional arcs, cliffhangers, and moments that would keep audiences binge-watching. Both sides were trying to protect their vision, but neither was willing to compromise. Dan later hinted that the turning point came when he realized the show was no longer helping his shop, it was hurting it. What began as a way to celebrate restoration had become a drain on resources and morale. The constant filming disrupted workflow, exhausted his crew, and blurred the line between real business and television storytelling. By late 2018, the tension had reached its peak. The crew was tired, the schedules were brutal, and Dan had to make a choice: continue sacrificing authenticity for television success, or step away to protect everything he had built. It was a decision that would mark the beginning of the end for FantomWorks, and it set the stage for one of the most abrupt exits in reality TV history. But when the show finally stopped filming, it wasn't the network that made the announcement, it was Dan himself. And what he said next left fans questioning everything they thought they knew about why FantomWorks really ended. When FantomWorks aired its final episodes in 2019, there was no dramatic farewell, no emotional send-off, and no official explanation from the network. The show simply ended. For millions of fans who had followed Dan Short's journey for years, the silence was deafening. Viewers flooded forums and social media with questions. Was the show canceled? Did Dan quit? Was there bad blood behind the scenes? For a while, no one seemed to know. Then, quietly, Dan broke the silence. On the official FantomWorks Facebook page, Dan posted an open letter titled, "Why DRS Quit." It was not the kind of polished statement you would expect from a television personality. It was raw, frustrated, and brutally honest. He explained that the show had taken a toll far greater than anyone could see. The production demands had become overwhelming, and the constant push to meet network expectations had drained both him and his team. Dan described years of grueling filming schedules, personal sacrifices, and moments when the joy of restoring cars, the very reason he started FantomWorks, had nearly disappeared. He revealed that the decision to walk away was not about fame, money, or ratings. It was about survival. The television world had begun to consume his real business. Customers who once came for quality restorations now came expecting celebrity encounters. The shop that once ran on craftsmanship and pride was now overrun with production crews, set schedules, and endless retakes. What had started as a dream had slowly turned into a machine that no longer felt like his. Dan also hinted that there were moments of grief and deep frustration that viewers never saw. The stress of balancing television production with real client work had led to sleepless nights, personal strain, and emotional exhaustion. "We stopped filming," he wrote, "because it stopped being about the cars." That line resonated deeply with fans. It was both an explanation and a confession. His post pulled back the curtain on something rarely acknowledged in reality television: how real people, not actors, bear the weight of manufactured entertainment. For years, Dan had fought to keep the show as authentic as possible, but authenticity has a price. And when it became clear that the cost was his peace of mind and his shop's integrity, he chose to walk away. Fans were divided. Some praised Dan for staying true to his principles, calling his decision brave and honorable. Others accused him of giving up too soon, believing that he could have adapted or delegated more. But one thing was undeniable. There was a sense that something deeper had broken long before the final episode aired. The network's silence only added to the mystery. No public statement, no clarification, no acknowledgement of Dan's post. It was as if FantomWorks had vanished overnight, leaving behind nothing but speculation and unanswered questions. But even as the cameras stopped rolling, Dan wasn't finished. Far from it. He was already planning his next move, one that would take him far from the world of network television and closer to the vision he had always wanted. Because for Dan Short, quitting wasn't the end, it was a reset. And that next chapter, as he would soon reveal, showed just how much FantomWorks meant to him, and how determined he was to reclaim it on his own terms. When the lights went out and the cameras finally left the Norfolk shop, Dan Short faced a silence that felt both foreign and freeing. For years, every clang of a wrench had been followed by a camera's whir. Every conversation risked being edited into a storyline. Now, it was just the hum of machines, the smell of oil, and the familiar rhythm of real work. FantomWorks was no longer a television show. It was once again what it had always been at its core, a workshop. But the aftermath of the show's end was not as simple as returning to business as usual. The years of filming had changed everything. The shop had become a destination for fans, tourists, and curious visitors who wanted a selfie more than a restoration. For Dan, that attention was flattering, but it came with new challenges. He was still repairing and restoring cars for clients. But now, expectations were sky high. Everyone wanted their build to be featured, to look cinematic, to have that television magic. But reality does not come with editing or background music. It comes with sweat, setbacks, and sometimes disappointment. In interviews and online videos, Dan began opening up about the toll that the show had taken. Not just financially, but emotionally. He talked about how, during filming, real customer cars had sometimes been delayed or sidelined because of production schedules. Even though every vehicle was ultimately completed, the constant juggling between show work and shop work had left lasting scars on his team. After the show ended, Dan made a promise to himself. Never again would entertainment take priority over craftsmanship. But Dan was not walking away from storytelling altogether. By 2021, he started teasing a new project called FantomWorks, Off-Grid, a show designed and produced entirely under his control. No network executives, no artificial deadlines, no scripted drama, just raw, unfiltered restoration the way he believed it should be. It was his way of taking back what FantomWorks had lost: authenticity. He began releasing videos through his own channels, sharing insights, lessons, and behind-the-scenes looks at builds without the constraints of television editing. Fans responded positively, praising the quieter, more genuine tone. It was not as flashy or dramatic, but it felt real, exactly what many had missed in later seasons of the show. Still, rebuilding wasn't easy. The end of FantomWorks had left lingering financial challenges. The exposure had brought in clients, yes, but it had also created misconceptions. Some assumed Dan was a millionaire from the show. Others thought the business had closed completely. The truth was far more grounded. Dan and his team continued to operate DRS Automotive full-time, working on restorations the old-fashioned way, one car at a time, one story at a time. Over the next few years, Dan became something of an advocate for honesty in the restoration world. He spoke candidly about how television often distorts reality, and how fans should appreciate the real work that goes unseen, the endless sanding, rewiring, and problem-solving that never makes it into a 40-minute broadcast. His message resonated with those who valued craftsmanship over showmanship. And while the bright lights of television had dimmed, FantomWorks found a new kind of legacy, one built on authenticity, resilience, and the refusal to let someone else control the narrative. Dan had gone through the rise, the fame, the controversy, and the burnout, and emerged with a clearer vision of who he was and what his brand stood for. But there was still one question that lingered, one that fans could not stop asking. If Dan could go back, would he do FantomWorks all over again? His answer to that would reveal more than anyone expected. Looking back, Dan Short often says that FantomWorks was both the greatest opportunity and the hardest lesson of his life. The show gave him global recognition, allowing him to share his passion for classic cars with millions of viewers. But it also exposed him to the cost of that fame, the misunderstandings, the stress, and the battle between authenticity and entertainment. What most fans never realized was how deeply personal the entire experience had been for him. Every car restored on the show carried his name, his standards, and his promise of integrity. When those values were tested, it hit him harder than any television critique ever could. Dan has spoken openly about the emotional roller coaster of watching his dream become a product. He admits there were times during filming when he questioned whether it was all worth it. He saw talented craftsmen burned out from overwork, real customers frustrated by filming delays, and the joy of restoration slowly replaced by anxiety over production notes and reshoots. Yet, even through all that, he never stopped loving the craft itself, the feeling of turning a forgotten hunk of metal into something alive again. In recent interviews, Dan's tone is calmer, more reflective. He no longer sounds like the fiery perfectionist who once barked orders across the shop floor. Instead, he talks about balance, about learning to protect passion from being consumed by business. He reminds fans that the version of FantomWorks they saw on TV was only a sliver of reality, carefully edited and condensed for entertainment. The real story, he says, was about perseverance, how to hold on to what you love when the world keeps trying to turn it into a show. Many fans still visit the shop, hoping to see the man who stood his ground against a television network and came out with his integrity intact. They find a quieter operation now. No bright lights, no scripted tension, just the steady hum of tools and the kind of focus that built FantomWorks in the first place. Dan often greets visitors with humility, thanking them for their support, but reminding them that what they saw on television was only part of the truth. The real FantomWorks, he says, never ended. It just went back to being what it was always meant to be, a place where people and cars get a second chance. In a world obsessed with spectacle, that message hits differently. Dan's story is a reminder that authenticity often comes at a cost, but it's a price worth paying. He didn't just rebuild cars, he rebuilt his purpose. The fame, the controversy, the exhaustion, all of it led him back to the same question that started it all. What does it mean to do something right, even when it's hard? For Dan Short, the answer lies in the silence after the cameras stopped rolling. It's in the satisfaction of a perfectly tuned engine, the gleam of restored chrome, and the knowledge that the legacy of FantomWorks was never about television. It was about truth, craftsmanship, and the refusal to compromise. Because sometimes, walking away isn't the end of a story. It's the only way to make sure that story stays real. If you enjoyed uncovering the real story behind FantomWorks, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps more people discover videos like this. What do you think about how Dan Short handled everything? Do you believe walking away was the right move, or should he have kept the show going? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you want more deep dives into the untold truths behind your favorite shows and personalities, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next story we're covering is even more unbelievable than this one. You won't want to miss it.